All right, I've got a good question here for you. The question is, if God does not give you more than you can handle, then why is there suicide? Um, Man, great question. And this is a really hard question to answer for a couple of reasons. One, um, I have friends who have suffered from that, and um, I've seen families have to go through things like suicide, um, and it's a terrible, terrible thing. But I want to do two things in responding to this question. One, I want to go to the verse that talks about that in the Bible, and then want to talk about how the church should respond. Um, so, first of all, if God won't give you more than you can handle, then why is there suicide? The verse that's being quoted there, and probably misunderstood, is from 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 13 and 14. It says, "No temptation has seized you except what is common to man, and God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, He will also provide a way out so that you can stand up under it." And what's interesting is that you have to understand the context of this verse. What Paul is addressing in his letter to the Corinthians is the temptations that they're facing that have been common temptations in the history of God's people. These are the same things people have been struggling with for years and years and years, and Paul is warning them not to fall into temptation. Don't put idols in front of God. Don't go back to your old habits. Now there's a big difference between temptation and suffering. The Bible's very clear, as we talked about in week 1 of our series, Skeptical. The Bible is very clear that suffering, which is very different from temptation, is something that we should expect to encounter, and that it's something that will come across our lives. I have no idea why those things happen, but I do know that there is a God who is present in the midst of suffering, and that not believing in God does you no good, because that leaves you in two places. One, a place with no higher moral law, because if you don't believe in God, then you can't believe in a higher moral law. But then secondly, if you don't believe in God in the midst of your suffering, then you have no one to comfort you. You have no one to say, "I know what you're going through," like God can. In fact, in Matthew chapter 26, verse 38, Jesus is about to go to the cross for your sins, for my sins. And he's in prayer with the Father, and he says, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." So here's how I would respond in two ways. One, if you're suffering and considering suicide, if you know someone who's in that place, number one, Jesus knows exactly how you feel. He's gone through the heaviness of the burden that you feel. He's even felt the pain that you feel right now. And yet in him we see an incredible example of what it means to live, not just for yourself, but for the people around you. How much life has come from him. Secondly, there's a response for the church in this. That people are going to be suffering, people are going to be hurting in church. It's our job to meet them in their need, meet them in their suffering. And so if you know someone who's struggling like this, battling suicide, going through hardship like this, then step into their life, be that expression of love in their lives that shows them that there are people who care, that there are people around them who love them. God will always walk alongside us. He will always be with us in the midst of our suffering, and we can't always explain why there is suffering. But we know that when it comes to temptation and suffering, they're two different things. We are going to face suffering. And sometimes that's going to come in the shape of suicide, which breaks my heart to even say that. But we know that God is going to walk alongside us in that. We find that Jesus has experienced the same pains that you are going through, or that your friends are going through, and calls you to trust in him, to rely on him. Don't rely on yourself, rely on his strength for you.